The sun was setting over the park, casting long shadows across the playground. Little kids laughed in the distance, parents chatted on benches, but Emily sat alone. She clutched her sketchbook to her chest, trying to ignore the sharp sting of shame in her chest. At just 16, she had learned too early what it meant to feel unsafe in public. Her father, a decorated war veteran, had always told her, "The world won't always be kind, Em, but don't ever let it make you smaller." But kindness was the last thing she felt that day. She had only come to the park to draw. It was her place of peace, the one quiet corner where she could be herself. But the peace shattered the moment the boys showed up. 3 of them. Loud. Cruel. Entitled. They spotted her sitting alone under the tree and smirked like they had found easy prey. "Hey, sweetheart," one of them called out, sauntering over. "What are you doing here all alone? Looking for attention?" Emily's stomach twisted. She didn't answer. She never did. They laughed. One reached for her sketchbook. "I asked you something," he said, this time louder, closer. "You deaf or just rude?" She pulled the book. Tighter, her hands trembling. "I'm just drawing. Please leave me alone." But her voice barely came out, a whisper lost in the wind. Another boy snatched her pencil. "What's this crap? You think you're some kind of artist, or just using it to get attention?" Their laughter rang out, ugly and sharp. Emily's breath hitched, tears stinging her eyes. Her heart pounded. She didn't want to cry. She didn't want to run. But she felt so small, so powerless, and just when it felt like the earth might swallow, her whole... Something changed. A deep voice called out from behind them. "That's enough." It was steady, calm, but carried the weight of command. The boys turned. Behind them stood 6 men. Broad shoulders, sharp eyes, no smiles, and every one of them wore a navy blue cap embroidered with the golden trident of the Navy SEALs. They weren't just veterans, they were legends, and in front of them stood the leader, James Donovan. Silver hair, proud posture, eyes that had seen war. He stepped forward slowly, his eyes locked on the boys. "You want to mess with someone," James said. "Then you deal with all of us." Silence. The wind even seemed to stop. The boys looked around, confused, nervous. "We were just talking," one muttered. "Didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" James repeated, his voice low. "You cornered a girl, mocked her, intimidated her. That's not just talking. That's cowardice." One of the other veterans stepped up, arms crossed. "And you picked the wrong girl!" Emily looked up, eyes wide. She recognized the voice. It was her dad's old friend, Rico. He had served 3 tours with her father. She remembered him from the funeral last year. Tears flooded her eyes again, but this time from something else. Relief. The boys backed up. Realizing the gravity of their mistake, "This park isn't yours to rule," Rico added. "And she's not alone." One by one, the SEALs formed a circle around Emily, not touching her, not speaking to her, just standing, tall, steady, unshakable. The boys muttered something and stumbled away, defeated. And just like that, it was over. But Emily couldn't move. She was still frozen in place, overwhelmed, her hands trembling from the shock. James knelt beside her. "Are you all right, Emily?" Her lips parted, but words failed. She nodded, barely. "We were meeting up to honor your father today," James said softly. "It's the anniversary of your dad's Silver Star Award. We were going to lay a wreath at his tree here in the park." Emily's eyes widened. Her dad's tree. She had completely forgotten the date. "You're safe now." James said gently. And you always will be, as long as we're around. That sentence broke something open in her. For the first time in months, she felt something bloom in her chest that had been missing since her father passed. Safety, belonging, strength. Emily sat quietly on the bench now, her sketchbook resting on her lap, untouched. The Navy SEALs stood a short distance away, giving her space, but never letting her feel alone. The weight of what had just happened still pressed against her chest, but beneath it, a strange warmth was rising. She wasn't used to people standing up for her, not since her father passed. Emily had always been a quiet soul. Even as a little girl, she'd never raised her voice, never liked attention. Her father used to joke that she had the strength of silence, just like her mother. She would spend hours in her room painting, lost in the colors she couldn't put into words. After her father's death, everything changed. The world felt louder, crueler. She withdrew further, hiding behind her drawings, carrying his old dog tags, in her pocket like a shield. But nothing could protect her from the eyes that judged her for being different, from the voices at school that called her weird, or the neighbors who only saw a shy, broken girl. They didn't know her heart. They didn't see how hard she was trying. She missed him, every day, missed his strong hugs, the way he would. Gently place his hand on her shoulder and say, "I'm proud of you, Em. Even when the world is loud, you speak with your heart." That's what real courage is. And now, the men he once served with, men who knew his voice, his laugh, his bravery, stood before her. And they chose to stand with her. Not because she asked, not because she begged, but because they recognized something in her. Something fragile and brave all at once. James walked back toward her and sat down beside her slowly. "Your dad," he said quietly. "He used to talk about you more than anything else in the world." Emily looked up, eyes glassy. "He said you had the gentlest soul he'd ever seen. Said you used to wait on the porch for him after every deployment, holding a crayon drawing in one hand and a mug of chocolate milk in the other." Emily smiled faintly. "I remember that," James chuckled. "He called you his quiet lion." Tears welled again, this time soft and warm. He said no matter how dark the world got, your spirit reminded him what he was fighting for. That sentence broke something open inside her. For so long she thought she had been fading, forgotten. But now, sitting next to someone who knew her father, not just the soldier but the dad, she felt seen again. Not as a victim, but as someone worth standing up for. The park had grown quieter now, the tension slowly replaced by a strange kind of reverence. People who had once turned their backs were now watching, not just the SEALs, but Emily, a teenage boy from the group who had harassed her, stood near the tree line, his face pale, eyes heavy. His friends had already disappeared, but he hadn't run. Something about the scene rooted him in place. He watched as Emily wiped her tears and stood slowly, holding her father's dog tags in her palm. James noticed him. He didn't move aggressively, just walked over, calm, collected. The boy swallowed hard as James approached. "Look, man, I didn't mean," he began. James raised a hand gently, not to threaten, but to stop the excuse. "You see her?" he asked, nodding toward Emily. The boy nodded. "She's the daughter of a man who bled for this country. A man who gave people like you the freedom to sit in this park. And the safety to mock someone without thinking about what they carry." The boy looked down, ashamed. "She's quiet because life has taught her to listen harder. She's gentle because her heart is heavy with grief. You bullied her because you thought she was weak. But let me tell you something. James stepped closer. That girl's father fought beside men like me. Brave men. And today, she stood her ground while you needed backup just to laugh at someone. The boy's eyes filled with guilt. His voice cracked. I didn't think it would hurt her like that. James looked him dead in the eye. And now you do. That's called awakening. There was silence. James didn't yell. He didn't humiliate. He taught. And the lesson landed. Emily watched from afar, her heart still fragile but beginning to bloom with a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. Justice. The boy hesitated, then turned toward her and walked over slowly. He stood in front of her, his head down. I'm sorry, he said. For real. I was being a jerk. I didn't think about who you were, or what you've been through. Emily didn't say anything at first. But then, with a calm voice that barely broke the air, she replied, You don't have to know someone's story to treat them with kindness. The boy nodded, tears stinging his eyes. I'll remember that. And just like that, something shifted. Not just in him, but in everyone watching. A group of teenagers had mocked a girl in a park, and now that girl stood taller than all of them, backed not just by war heroes, but by the quiet strength of truth. Emily's pain had created a moment of reflection that pierced through ego, ignorance, and cruelty. That's what her father would have wanted. That's what honor looks like. Emily stood under the towering oak, sunlight warming her face, but her chest felt cold. The boy's apology echoed in her ears, sincere and trembling, yet it couldn't undo the sting. Still, her silence held power, and now everyone could feel it. She held her father's dog tags, tight, the metal biting into her palm. They were more than just metal. They were a lifeline to the man who once stood by her side. Today she felt him there again, not in shadow, but in spirit. James stepped closer, eyes soft, his voice low. You didn't just endure, Emily. You inspired. She looked up, eyes brimming, and for the first time, she believed him. From the group of Navy SEALs, an older man stepped forward. With quiet reverence, he held a folded American flag, edges worn, memory soaked. This was your dad's, he said. He asked us to give it to you when you were ready. Her knees buckled slightly as the flag touched her hands. This was the same one they'd handed her at the funeral. Only this time, it didn't represent goodbye. It represented strength. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks as she clutched it to her heart. James rested a hand on her shoulder, grounding her in the moment. He's still here, he whispered, and today you carried him with honor. The park, once filled with cruel laughter, now felt sacred. A stillness fell over the space, people watching, understanding. She hadn't raised her voice, but she had raised awareness. Emily smiled through the tears, not because it stopped hurting, but because finally, the world had seen her. Not just as a veteran's daughter, but as a warrior in her own right. The breeze shifted as Emily stood still, gripping the flag like a shield. Around her, the Navy SEALs remained unmoving, their posture alert, their eyes scanning. To the world, they were retired, but to Emily, they had just gone back on duty. James, the oldest of them, stepped beside her like a wall of steel. You're not alone anymore, he said, voice calm but unshakable. He wasn't offering help. He was declaring allegiance. Emily's heart pounded, not from fear now, but from a surge of strength. She could feel it in the way they stood around her, like sentinels of justice, They weren't just honoring her father, they were protecting his legacy through her. At the far end of the park, the bullies who once jeered had returned. Their laughter wasn't as loud this time, but it stung just the same. Emily looked at them, then at the men beside her, and didn't flinch. James stepped forward without a word, his eyes locked on the troublemakers. Two others moved with him, not as attackers, but as protectors reclaiming ground. They weren't here to fight. They were here to make it clear. Not today. The boys saw them, slowed, then stopped, uncertain. There was no shouting, no threat, just the steady approach of real power. They saw the medals, the stance, the silence, and they turned away. Emily didn't smile. Not yet. It wasn't victory she felt. It was grounding. She had feared this park, this bench, this memory for weeks. But now, those fears were outnumbered by honor, courage, and silent force. James turned, back, eyes still alert. "We don't need to speak loud to be heard." Emily nodded slowly. Every man there had risked their lives for peace. Today, they fought without fists, but with presence, and it was enough. One of the SEALs handed Emily a small, polished coin. It was her father's, his old challenge coin, passed down only in rare moments. "He said you'd earn this someday," the man said. "Today's that day." Emily held it in her palm, its edges warm from the man's hand. It felt like armor, not metal, but meaning. She closed her fingers around it, her breath steadying. Another man, grizzled, quiet, nodded toward her. "This park? Yours now?" His voice was raspy, filled with depth only experience gives. "You walk through here, we walk behind you. No more shadows." The message wasn't revenge. It was restoration. They weren't here to make others fear. They were here to make her safe, to give her back what was taken: confidence, security, and dignity. Emily stood straighter, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you." James smiled faintly. "Don't thank us. You reminded us why we served." She didn't just survive harassment, she rewrote its ending. Kids watched from nearby, their parents glancing, whispering, then nodding. A woman handed her daughter a flower, walked over and offered it to Emily. "Your dad raised a warrior," she said. "We see it now. No parade, no cameras, just quiet validation from a changed world." That was all Emily needed. Not attention, but acknowledgement. She didn't need to speak to be heard. Her presence said everything. As the sun lowered behind the trees, the SEALs stayed close. They weren't in uniform, but every movement spoke of discipline, loyalty, resolve. They didn't follow Emily out of obligation. They followed her out of respect. One boy, barely 13, approached with shaky hands. "I saw what they did," he whispered. "I wanted to help, but I froze." Emily bent down, smiled gently. "You don't have to be loud to be brave." The SEALs watched this exchange with pride. She was now one of them, not by training or battle, but by bravery, compassion, and resolve. The same fire they had carried into war, she carried into healing. Every step Emily took now echoed with her father's teachings. Stand firm, speak with your heart. And when others stumble, stand taller. She wasn't her father's shadow. She was his living echo. The park would never be the same. Where once cruelty crept in, now honor stood guard. And in its heart stood Emily, unshaken, unafraid, and never alone again. The park grew quiet again, but a tension lingered in the air like smoke. Emily sat on the same bench where everything had unfolded just hours before. She felt braver, yet her hands still trembled as the memory replayed. Somewhere in the distance, a shadow moved too deliberately to be casual. James noticed it first, placing a hand gently on Emily's shoulder. "Stay here," he whispered, scanning the tree line. With sharp, practiced eyes, 3 of the seals silently fanned out, blending into the fading light. To an outsider, they were ordinary men, but their every step spoke of training. Emily watched with bated breath, her pulse racing with a new kind of fear. The rustling grew louder, footsteps, quick and reckless, approaching from the path. Emily stood halfway up, heart pounding, unsure if she should run or call out. Then a figure appeared, one of the same boys who mocked her before. He was alone, panting, looking behind him like he was being chased. His eyes widened when he saw Emily, but there was no laughter now, only fear. Real, raw fear etched into his young face. "Please," he gasped, running to her. "They're coming for me now." Emily stared at him, confused. "Who?" she asked, voice steady despite shaking knees. "The older guys, the ones I brought. They're mad I walked away." Just then, a branch snapped nearby, followed by hushed, aggressive voices. James returned, face grim, jaw tight. "We've got company," he said. Emily stood still, surrounded by tension thick enough to cut. The young boy clung to her side now, no longer a bully, but a target. He was broken, vulnerable, and for the first time, quiet. He hadn't come to mock. He'd come for protection. James nodded toward the path, where silhouettes moved with hostile energy. They weren't just kids this time. Older teens, drunk on power, daring escalation. Emily could feel their intentions, and they weren't innocent anymore. "We handle this our way," James whispered to his men. Emily didn't know what their way meant, but she saw no panic, only resolve. They stood in a half-circle, shielding her and the boy from view. The figures stepped out, loud and crude, not knowing what they were walking into. "What now, little hero?" one taunted, cracking his knuckles. But then, his smirk faded as James stepped into the light, fully visible. The air shifted, confidence draining from the newcomers like water from a sieve. They recognized authority in posture, in calm, in the silence of trained eyes. This wasn't just a group of men, they were a force. One SEAL stepped forward, badge still engraved on his belt. "I've seen what real danger looks like," he said, voice low and deadly. This is a mistake you don't want to make." For a moment, no one moved. The night paused, holding its breath. Emily could feel the world tilting, uncertain which way it would fall. Then the tallest boy muttered, "Let's go," and they turned back. Emily exhaled slowly, not realizing she had held her breath for so long. The young boy beside her was shaking, eyes wide with shock. "Why did you protect me?" he asked. "I was horrible to you." She looked at him, quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Because someone had to break the cycle. And I'm strong enough now." Her words didn't need to be loud. They cut deeper than a scream. The boy's head fell, guilt crashing over him like a tidal wave. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know what I was doing." Emily nodded. "Now you do. What matters is what you do next." James approached, watching the boy carefully. "You want to change?" The boy nodded quickly, tears brimming in his eyes. "Then start by standing up for her, for others, and for yourself." The SEALs didn't just disperse the threat, they planted a lesson. And in that moment, The boy became more than a bystander to pain. He became the start of change, a new story, rewritten, from guilt to growth. Emily turned to James, her voice firm but full of emotion. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for protection, but for showing what strength looks like." James gave a soft smile. "It's your strength, Emily. We just reminded you." As the group walked away from the park, the street lamps flickered on. They didn't need cheers or applause, only the quiet power of redemption. And behind them, the shadows faded, replaced by light, courage, and a new beginning. The morning sun rose gently over the park, casting golden light across the grass. Emily returned, this time not as a victim, but as someone transformed. The pain still lingered, but so did her courage, and now they lived side by side. She sat on the same bench where fear once gripped her heart like a vice. But today, she held a cup of coffee and a calm breath instead. This wasn't just any day. It was a new start, a quiet triumph. Nearby, the same boy who once mocked her now helped an elderly woman with her walker. His laughter was softer, humble, different than before. Sincere. He looked up, met Emily's gaze, and nodded with quiet respect. It wasn't perfection. Life never promised that, but it was progress, hard-earned, honest, and shaped by choice. Emily smiled. Sometimes the greatest victories are the ones no one sees. At home, James stood by the kitchen window, watching his sister through the glass. There was pride in his eyes, not for saving her, but for watching her save herself. His mission as a brother was never to shield her forever, but to empower her. The retired SEALs stayed in touch, quietly checking in from time to time. They became family, each one a thread in the fabric of her healing. In their strength, she had found her own. Emily began volunteering at a center for young girls who had experienced bullying. She didn't talk much about what happened, but she listened. And through listening, she helped others find their voice, too. One evening, she stood at a school assembly, microphone trembling in her hand. For a heartbeat, fear crept in. But she remembered the park and her brother's words. With steady breath, she began, "Sometimes silence hides the loudest pain." The room grew still, eyes wide, hearts open. In that moment, she wasn't a victim. She wasn't even just a survivor. She was a leader, born not from ease, but from every bruise and broken breath. After the applause, the young boy from the park approached her again. "Your speech," he said. "It changed me." She smiled softly. "You changed you." I just held up the mirror. Outside, the wind carried the scent of spring, fresh and forgiving. Emily stood beneath a sky that once felt too far to reach. But now it stretched wide and endless, just like the future she was ready to claim. The past had not vanished, nor had the scars, but they no longer controlled her story. They strengthened it, and that was her peace. That was her hope. James met her at the curb, handing her a flower he picked along the walk. "No battles today," he teased gently. She laughed. "Not anymore, just growth." As they walked home together, the world didn't look different, but she did. With each step, Emily felt more grounded, more real, more alive. The girl who once sat shaking on a bench was gone, and in her place stood a force. Not because of rage, not because of revenge, but because of love, awakening, and the unwavering decision to rise. And that more than anything is what made her unbreakable. She was her father's daughter, her brother's, pride, and her own champion now. What had started with harassment ended with healing, and in that healing, others found the courage to begin. As the wind brushed her face and the sun warmed her skin, Emily looked up and whispered, "I made it." And she meant it.